Hello friends, I'm Michael Kingswood, and this is Story Time. And I've been running ragged the last several weeks, so I've been neglecting to do the normal Tuesday updates for Glimmer, Vale, my heroic fantasy novel that starts the Glimmer Vale Chronicles. Last time we did here on YouTube and elsewhere was Chapter 8, and I've actually put up through Chapter 11 on Substack and elsewhere, so we're just going to do 3 in a row today. So, Chapter 9, written by me, read by a great voice actor. Let's get to it.
Chapter 9. Working Arrangements. Mayor Brimley bubbled over with enthusiasm when Julian and Raedric announced their acceptance of the offer. He shook both their hands repeatedly, fairly bouncing up and down each time he did.
"Thank you, gentlemen, thank you. The people of Lyttelton will honor your names always."
He sure was laying it on a bit thick, considering they hadn't really done anything yet. Julian found it understandable to an extent. The town had been living in fear for weeks. But still, he couldn't help but wonder how true the mayor's gratitude really was. Constable Mallory was more reserved, merely nodding with a small smile. Again, appropriate. It was the mayor's place to be boisterous, and from what Julian had seen, they all tended to enjoy it. The constable had a serious job, though, and that tended to attract more serious, business-minded men to it. Finally, Mayor Brimley took a step back.
"You'll report to Lucian on this, but I'll be keeping tabs on how things are going. For now, I'll leave you to get better acquainted."
He beamed a smile at them and added,
"Good luck to us all."
Then he turned and strolled out of the inn.
"Well, he's plenty enthusiastic,"
Raedric quipped.
"Mayor Brimley cares very deeply for the people of this town,"
Constable Mallory said. Just then, the waitress came out of the kitchen, carrying a tray with 2 plates, a pitcher, and 2 cups on it. She approached the table, but paused when she saw the constable standing next to them. She looked between Julian, Raedric, and Mallory with a questioning expression on her face. The constable noted her presence and gestured for her to get about her work, saying,
"I'll not interrupt your breakfast any longer. Come by my office after you've dined, and we'll discuss the situation in more detail."
Breakfast consisted of chopped up fried potatoes, a hunk of bread smeared with butter, and fish meat baked in a sweet batter, along with spiced cider. Julian had noticed in their short time in the town that the locals seemed to put fish into just about everything. That was understandable, he supposed, considering the proximity of the lake and its obvious contribution to the local economy. Still, fish for breakfast struck him as odd. It was tasty, though. He couldn't complain about that. "I hope you know what you're doing," Julian said as he and Raedric tromped upstairs to retrieve their equipment. His thigh began to sting again, causing him to question his decision. Raedric responded with a soft snort and a shrug of his shoulders.
"You know as much as I do."
Julian rolled his eyes. Yeah, this was going to end up being a bad idea. A few minutes later, after they donned their mail and strapped on their weapons, the 2 friends headed out. In mid-morning, Lyttelton was markedly different than it had been the previous evening. More people were out and about, conducting the errands of the day. Looking to the right as they exited the inn, the road became more congested quickly as it descended to the lake shore and the docks. A trio of boats were tied up along the lone pier in sight. A line of men stood around next to each boat on the dock, helping offload large bundled items in a daisy train leading off of the pier, and out of sight to the right. The scene struck Julian as a bit odd. A little early to be offloading, isn't it? Raedric followed Julian's gaze toward the dock. A confused expression on his face, he shrugged his shoulders before replying,
"I would think so. I wonder what's going on."
There was no particular hurry to get to the constable's office, so the 2 men set off toward the docks. The road descended quickly, and before long they reached the head of the pier. From there they could see 5 more piers stretching out into the lake, each with a couple of boats tied up and similar lines of men hauling bundles. The lines of workers converged on a large wagon that waited at the head of the second pier, 1 street over from where Raedric and Julian stood. As they watched, the wagon reached its capacity, and a balding man with a bit of a paunch waved off the lines of men with their burdens. Then he hopped into the front of the wagon and shook the reins. His team of 2 horses began moving, and the wagon departed up the street. Moments later, a second, identical wagon appeared from the same street and came to a halt before the pier, and the lines of men commenced to fill it. That was curious. Julian and Raedric hurried past the newly arrived wagon and up the next street. A block up the road, the first wagon was parked next to the side entrance of a nondescript building that could only be a warehouse. Additional workers were offloading the wagon and bringing its contents within. The 2 friends walked past the wagon to the corner of the warehouse, where another door that looked to be the main entrance was situated at the head of 3 short stairs. Julian looked at Raedric questioningly and received a shrug in response, so he led the way to the main entrance and then inside. Within, the warehouse was larger than it appeared from the outside. The ground level consisted mostly of a single large room with a vaulted ceiling. A number of large bins stood at intervals around the room. The workers came in through the side and walked to specific bins. There they unwrapped their packages and dumped the contents, fish of course, into the bins. As Raedric and Julian watched, one of the bins became filled to capacity, and a man standing near it pulled on a rope. A bell rang overhead, and, a moment later, another pair of workers entered the room, pushing a bin before them. It was only then that Julian noticed that each bin was wheeled. The two new men replaced the full bin with their empty one and pushed it towards the rear of the warehouse, where a wide pair of swinging doors separated this room from another.
"Hey, what are you doing in here?"
The voice, gruff and businesslike, drew Julian's eye to a tall, stocky man who was approaching from the left. The man was in his early middle years and wore his graying black hair cut short. He wore his work boots and coveralls like the other men, but his shirt was red while theirs were blue. Julian surmised he was the foreman. "We were just curious about your setup here," Julian said, putting on a friendly smile. "Seems a bit early to be offloading the boats. The day's not even a third done." The foreman scowled.
"It's almost done for this shift. Fish don't jump except at twilight, so the boats go out before sunrise and at sunset to catch them."
He looked them up and down, his eyes lingering on the sword at Julian's hip and Raedric's saber.
"Don't see what that matters to you. You don't have the look of men looking for a job."
"We're not."
"Then get out. This is a business, not a tourist attraction."
He pointed with authority toward the door they had entered through. There wasn't any point in objecting, so they left. It took about 10 minutes to walk to Constable Mallory's office from the fish warehouse. By the end of the walk, Julian's thigh was throbbing again. Each step caused him to grit his teeth. This was no way for a big hero to start off his job as savior. Constable Mallory was seated behind the desk to the right as they walked in the door, perusing a small collection of official-looking papers. He looked up as they entered and nodded in greeting.
"I was just going over the reports of all the raids to date. I thought maybe you would like to review them as well. Might be there's something we missed."
That made sense, Julian supposed. He moved over to the desk to pick up one of the reports, but Raedric's words brought him up short.
"Where is the prisoner?"
Julian turned to see his friend looking into the cell block. His eyes widened when he noticed what Raedric was talking about. All the cell doors were open. Julian turned back to the constable, a simmering anger beginning to well up within him. What had these people done? Then Constable Mallory spoke, dousing Julian's anger as quickly as it flared up.
"Fendig has him down at the courthouse for his preliminary hearing with the judge. They should be back in an hour or so."
"I didn't realize you have the resources for a full inquiry and trial here, as remote as you are," Raedric replied as Julian picked up the stack of reports.
"Due process is still due process, wherever you are,"
Constable Mallory said, his lips turning downward into a slight frown.
"I didn't mean to imply,"
Raedric began, but Constable Mallory cut him off.
"You did more than just imply it. You flat out stated that."
The argument faded into the background as Julian picked up the reports and began reading. The first was the deposition from a month and a half ago by a fellow named Modron Galanti of Hollis over by the Great Sea. He owned a trading company and had been traversing Holbart's Pass when he was accosted by half a dozen men who were equipped similarly to the brigands Julian and Raedric encountered the previous day. Galanti reported that his guards had repelled the attack, but one of his carriages had been burned to the ground, along with all of its wares, and 2 of his men killed. Total loss, 200 marks, including contractual reparations he now owed to the families of his lost men. Julian winced. That much money would keep 20 families eating for a year in many areas of the kingdom. That was bad. The next report was worse. Julian knew what to expect from what Mallory had told them back at the inn, but the deposition went into more details. Lev Harpwell was the man who discovered the burned-out farmstead during a run to deliver horseshoes from Gil Aberden, one of the 2 blacksmiths in town. What he described. It made the burned-out farm Julian and Raedric came across seem civilized by comparison. What was wrong with these people? The reports continued, almost a full dozen of them spanning the time between the first caravan attack and the attack above the falls yesterday. Julian replaced the last report before his and Raedric's back down on Constable Mallory's desk and suppressed a slight shiver. This was not going to be easy. He looked over at Raedric, who was reading an earlier report, and shook his head. All of a sudden, I've got a bad feeling about this. Raedric looked up, one eyebrow moving upward as he responded.
"You had a good feeling before?"
"You know what I mean. The lady who gave this last report said there were dozens of attackers. We'll need a bloody army to fight them off." Constable Mallory nodded.
I'd come to a similar conclusion. I asked the fishing foremen to lend me some of their boys like they do in the summer, but they refused.
With a sigh, he settled back into his chair.
I'm hoping they'll come around if you can add a few smaller victories to what you did yesterday, and get these cells filled.
Let me guess, you and Fendig won't be coming with us for these victories. He shook his head.
We will help as we can, but you must understand my primary duty is to maintain law and order within the town limits.
Great. Raedric picked up the final report and scanned it quickly. Did the wounded guard from this last attack pull through? Constable Mallory shook his head.
Alas, no. He passed not long after we got him to town. The guildsmen from the healers' circle tried their best, but they say he lost too much blood.
That's too bad. What about the woman? Is she still in town?
Oh, yes,
replied the constable.
And complaining every minute about it. She's holed up over at the Orlock. Word is, she tried to hire every coachman in town to drive her down to Callus, but none of them would take the job.
Julian felt his interest piqued. How come? Mallory shrugged.
Too dangerous.
A sudden grin appeared on his face, and he chuckled, adding,
Of course, I can think of 2 men offhand who said they were willing, except for her attitude.
Julian had a feeling he knew who the constable was talking about. Good looking? Again, Mallory shrugged.
They don't seem to have problems with the ladies.
Not the drivers, the woman! The constable blinked and flushed slightly. Clearing his throat, he nodded.
Yes, quite striking, in fact.
Julian grinned. This was turning out to be his lucky day. Giving Raedric a little punch in the shoulder, he said, I think I know where we can get some help.
All right, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, Kingswood, I love that story. How can I buy your books? Great question. Here's the answer. Best way to buy my books is to come over to my site, michaelkingswood.com/store. That will bring you to this place, which is my company's store where you can get books, merchandise, all kinds of great stuff that I've set up. And but you're wondering how it works. Well, here, let's check out Glimmer Chronicles, which is my heroic fantasy series that I've talked a lot about. If you haven't read it yet, you really should. It's a super fun series. Everything you would want. You should start with Glimmer, which is the first book. Come over here to Glimmer. It'll load up. Hey, look at that. You get the book description, links to other books in the series, great stuff. And you can pick the format you want. You got ebook, trade paperback, and audiobook. Not everything I've written is an audiobook yet, but almost everything's a trade paperback and everything's an ebook. But like, hey, I know what you're thinking. Hey, I'm buying from you. How do I get the ebook? There's a service that I work with called Book Funnel. When you buy from my site, they will send you a link. That link will lead you to a page where they will walk you through how to load your ebook onto the device you're choosing, or you can just download it to computer and do whatever you want with it. So that way it's easy peasy. Maximum profit for me. All kinds of fun for you. But I know, a lot of you guys, you like your Kindles, you like your other things, and you want to go straight to the retailer, and that's fine. You can come over here to michaelkingswood.com/books2read, the number 2. And I have this handy dandy universal booklet aggregator page set up. You can scroll through, look at all my stories, all my books, and pick which one you want, and then go from there. Here's how it works. Let's do Glimmer again. So Glimmer, first book in the series, you click on it, you get this thing, you get the book description, you get all other books in the series, and you say, get it now. Okay, get it now. Look what happens. Every retailer where you can find it is here. You can pick the one that you like best and say, okay, cool. Well, let's say I wanted to buy it in, I don't know, let's just say Kobo, because why not? Click on it. And then it'll ask you, is this your favorite store? If so, you set it. So every time you come back, you don't have to choose. It'll just go take you to your favorite store. But let's just, you don't have to do that. Well, we're going on to Kobo. Hoo-yah. Hey, look at this. Here it is on the Kobo site. People like it. People have bought it. Good stuff. Links to other things of mine. And, or you can do one of the other stores that you like. Either way, you get the book you like, I get money, it's all good.